Hi, my name's Thete and we're back on to looking ahead towards Age of Sigmar 3rd edition again. Now in this video I'm going to be adding my thoughts onto a few conversations I've seen flying around concerning whether there will be a major change in philosophy regarding points in the same way as there was for 40k 9th edition. So when looking ahead towards a possible new edition for Age of Sigmar, nothing's announced, but we know how Games Workshop operate. They don't go for very many years without a new edition of their major games. So if it's not this year, it would almost be certainly next year. And people will also inevitably look at the revamp from 40k and wonder if anything would be translatable to Age of Sigmar. Some have wondered if it would be a good idea to ramp up the points cost. Now, to my mind, this was a good move for 40k, absolutely bought it for 40k, but not a good move for Age of Sigmar. However, it does have its benefits as well as its drawbacks. So I'm going to go over those and then I'll explain what I think are the downsides. So, because I just don't think it would work for the fantasy game. But the benefits first of all, and there are two main ones, and they're big ones. One is if all units cost more points, then the game becomes easier to balance. Apart from anything else, it's easier to distinguish between two units of slightly differing power when the points value is higher. And not only could it be the same, as you could have two units, the same points as each other, one's not quite so powerful, but if the points value is lower for these units, you can take more of them, increasing the cumulative effect of doing so. Taking lots of units means of a perhaps slightly underpointed unit compared to others becomes very significant. In other words, the gap between a theory-crafted competitive list and one that's thrown together with models that the player really likes or just happen to be coming into the start collecting efficient boxes becomes larger. More points means more differentiation and fewer units, which means smaller gap between strong and weak lists. The second benefit is that the games are quicker. Now, most people won't really have the facility to play games in their home, and few will have access to clubs and opponents that can accommodate games of several hours. Sure, in a tournament, a 2,000 point game will take 2.5 hours, and most people have got time for that, but in a more casual setting, they tend to take significantly longer as you spend more time chatting and so on. Certainly at my local gaming club, when the pandemic allows for it to be open, which is not right now, you will generally not complete 2,000 point games, and so most people just play 1,500 point ones. But if it's a 2,000 point army, looking like what would now be a 1,750 point army, then it would be easier to fit it into the time available and more people would play these. Why does it matter? Not only is it better preparation for those who want to go on to tournaments, but more importantly, the game allows for different sized armies, but is mostly play tested around the gold standard of 2,000 points. The game therefore feels better when played using the parameters which were used for the main design. In fact, it's only in the last year that Games Workshop even bothered to design rules for 1,000 point games. Beforehand, you could make a 1,000 point game, but you would be using the standard 2,000 point battle plans for a 1,000 point army. A few small units fighting over 6 objectives sometimes. But if there was a general move to raise points values, more people would play 2,000 points games. And the armies would feel more balanced. Now, there are certainly balance issues in the game, as there will be in all such games, but I sometimes feel that perceived imbalances are sometimes just down to the fact some armies cope better with smaller games being played over objectives designed for larger games. Play the game as it was designed and balance would feel better. So that all sounds like good reason to do what they did in 40k, but I'm actually against it, and I'll try and explain why. So first of all, both Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40k are role-playing games. You want to immerse yourself into how it feels when you're reading about it. Now, I always say that mechanics are the most important feature. Never sacrifice mechanics over the feel of the game, which is subjective anyway, but the feel does matter. Age of Sigmar pictures fantasy armies against each other. That's what it does. Maybe not to the same extent as Warhammer Fantasy Battle did, but there is still supposed to be that feel of epic armies clashing in the realms. This is not the case for 40k. Sure, there are epic battles in the fluff, but it's often skirmishers when it's linked to 40k. So if you take a look at some examples of how Games Workshop themselves present the two games. So Warhammer community brought out a quick how to get started with Age of Sigmar article. Big old clash of armies in the image. And this is, you find this in images of Age of Sigmar generally. Now in the latest 40k articles on the site, not including the Kill Team ones, the specifically 40k articles, what you have is a series of small scale skirmishes. You know, even going back to the Drukhari reveal a few weeks ago, it's a raiding force, not an army. The feel of the two games in terms of scale of conflicts is fundamentally different. When 40k wants an epic clash, it has Armageddon or similar games. Age of Sigmar is Age of Sigmar. You can downscale with Warcry, but you can't upscale. It is the epic clash. Secondly, there is the issue of synergies. Now, some armies are comprised of units that will largely just do their own thing, largely on their own. You will take some units with mobility for grabbing distant objectives, some to smash into your opponent and hold them up, others to act as a speed bump, so it's a sacrificial unit but to slow them down. You have to take a spread of units that allow you to play the battle plan well. But other armies rely on units that buff each other, work in conjunction with each other to become much greater than the sum of their parts. Night Hunter are a brilliant example of this. No, I'm not going to say that this is a top tier army if only people would play it right, but it is a lot better than people find because most people don't seem to combine the synergies. So if you take one cunning trick with Night Hunter, it's a combination of two really. So because you can deploy half your army in reserve and you get a free round of combat in the charge phase, if you roll a 10 plus, they are pretty good at causing major disruption to your opponent. So take this 2,000 point army, has 17 units in it. That means 8 of them can be deployed in reserve. Now, even if my opponent makes me have the first turn, which is not uncommon, and there's no way I'm going to be choosing with 17 units, I can plonk 8 units on whichever side seems to be the choice flank to attack. They won't all be able to get the charge in, of course. In fact, only a minority will, needing a 9, but a few will get in, and one will probably get in with an extra round of fighting. So it can strike with immediate damage, and it's not even like your opponent can do a lot about it even when they get their turn. You're all the way on one flank, and the other half of your army will be able to reinforce it if necessary if they try wheeling around, which will take a couple of turns. Significantly increase the points cost, and although you could still apply the same tactic, because you'd have way fewer units, the odds move away from your favour in terms of getting enough into combat to be able to do that damage. In other words, massively increasing the points cost hits some armies much harder than others, creating huge imbalances until another round of 3rd edition books comes out. Then finally, so away from the so-called multiple small unit forces, the MSU armies, and onto ones that are already fairly elite. So for all the epic nature of an Age of Sigmar army, there are some that encourage the use of relatively small numbers of units already, if not outright number of models. So it wouldn't just be MSU armies that suffer. You might find it impossible to field an effective Nagash or Okayan army at all, or even just ones like, you know, the recently released Head Knights of Slaanesh that, without needing to take gods, tend not to be that huge. Knock them down too much and you're back to the problem of trying to play like a 1,000 point game with battle plans designed for 2,000 point games. You just don't have enough units for the board presence necessary to win. Then you say, well, then you'd have to choose different units, go for the cheaper units. But then in those armies, the cheaper units are not competitive. If someone has a list with relatively few models in it, it's not because they don't like managing lots of units, it's because their particular army has the most points efficient units being the more expensive ones. So on balance, I would suggest that the reasons in favour of such a move are not as strong as in 40k. The feel of the two games needs to be quite different, and I'd already suggest that the points values in Age of Sigmar is already such that it runs the risk of crowding some armies out of competitiveness if messed about with too much. If you look at a 2,000 point Age of Sigmar army now, and you put it next to a 2,000 point 40k army, a lot of them don't actually look that dissimilar in terms of the models, do they? Or the number of models or number of units. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And until next time, I'll see you later.